The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals participating in the show. All persons described or mentioned in the podcast should be considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. This podcast contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions along with adult language, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
On September 5th, 1982, sometime between the hours of 6 a.m. and 7 a.m., a young man picks up his papers to be delivered. He is seen by witnesses speaking to a man in an unidentified car. He disappears, even with the boy being featured on milk cartons. A supposed event in 1997 makes this one of the strangest disappearances of all time. You're listening to the Mysterious Brews podcast, and tonight we bring you the case of John David Gosch.
West Des Moines, Iowa, 1982. 12-year-old Johnny Gosch has a Sunday morning paper route. Until one morning, he vanishes.
A young boy delivering newspapers, which every God-fearing American kid wants to do, ends up disappearing.
As the search for Johnny unfolds, a terrifying theory emerges.
They were kidnapping and selling children.
Welcome to a deep, dark, dank, moist basement somewhere in the bowels of Georgia. Well, Coach, it's been a whole, 2 days since we recorded part one.
I don't know, man. It's like we're on top of this shit or something.
It's like we're professionals. After 6 years,
Right.
We're professionals.
Well, I don't know about that. Like I told you off air, I'm dealing with a dog again, but this dog today has 2 less nuts than he did yesterday. So he's still trying to figure out the cone and everything else.
He's like, have you seen my balls? Because when I went in that car, I had my balls. When I got out of that car.
Legit did not want to get back into the car because he was like, I know what the hell happened.
Yeah, I got in there.
Last time I got in this car. So
I was a wild young buck.
Yeah, I think he has to go potty, but man, it's raining like nobody's business.
Yep, we are in the
My part of Georgia.
Summertime pop-up thunderstorms. They pop up, rain like hell, and disintegrate within a few minutes. So, Coach, I know this is not a food podcast, but have I told you about it's a hybrid spatchcock chicken that I do on the grill?
What? A what cock chicken?
Called a spatchcock. Basically, you take it.
I do know that you love the cock.
Chicken, yes. So you take the cavity and you cut the skin right there where the skin's at, separates the breast and the leggers. And then basically you just fold that son of a bitch open and you frog him. He looks like a big old frog. Break the backbone. Dude, we've done it with turkey and it reduces the cooking time tremendously. I just cooked like a 7-pound whole chicken in like an hour and a half, and I mean melt in your mouth. And I even kept the skin on the thighs just for you. And they was good and crispy.
Oh, man, that sounds delicious.
If you hadn't ever tried it, folks, look up spatchcock chicken or frog style. I think somebody in Texas came up with that. Imagine that.
Well, I tried a new restaurant around here recently, and it was really good. If you like gourmet hot dogs, and you're up in my part of the neighborhood, go to Juan's Hoiners.
Juan's Hoiners?
That's good, though. I got a dang hot dog that had, it was a hot dog, then ribeye, then chorizo, then bacon, and grilled onions. It was freaking good.
How many did you have?
Oh, I didn't even eat all of it. You should have seen the size of that whiner.
It's a big old whiner. Whiner's on the glass at the Kiwanis Club, boys.
Whiners on the glass at the Alano Club? They're just out of control.
Can't have it. Can't have it.
My boy's too much for you. No, coach. They just kids.
Yeah. They just them there little ones. All right, so no boring BS business. So we're just gonna jump right into it.
People like the banter, man. That's where we get the comedy.
Well, no, I'm not talking about that BS. There's gonna be plenty of that in the episode. I'm talking about any of our new. I may have misspoke. I know that's a travesty, and it would be the first time in 6 years that I have misspoken. But I may have
6 years. That's crazy.
It is, man. I may have said that the new sheriff of Saline County was the nephew of the Harmon guy, and I'm not 100% sure that it's Saline County that the nephew is a sheriff of. He is a sheriff in a county in Arkansas. I'm just not 100% sure it's Saline County.
I did get some feedback, though, I need to tell you about. Somebody pointed out to me, they said, well, the more I listen, more I notice that you tend to get quieter as the episode goes on.
It's because his ADHD kicks in.
I said, well, no, because he's so damn long-winded. If I talk, we'll never end.
Oh, Jesus.
Here we go. Get his shit out.
Here we go. It's all my fault, folks. All my fault.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah, buddy. Well, I do know, Coach, that you do love to hear me talk, and that's why I just keep going sometimes.
Well, you know it.
All right, ladies and gents, we're going to get after it. This episode is part 2. We are looking at a minimum part 3. I'm not sure we can wrap it up in 3, so this may be a Jennings 8 situation. Hopefully, we can give you a long part 3 and wrap this thing up with a nice little bow on it. But we are still sticking with what is going on around Noreen Gosch and John Sr. I don't have the date, but just a caveat, I guess. So at some point during this, John Sr. kind of accepted the fact that Johnny was basically gone and he would never see him again. And then Noreen, as most parents would, and I'm not faulting her for this, but as most parents would, she continued to look, search, listen, entertain any theories. And I think John just got exhausted, to be honest with you. And so they wound up getting a divorce. And you see that a lot of times with missing children. The marriage just takes a toll.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you experience a tragedy like this, especially with the unknown factor of it. You don't know what happened to your kid. I mean, you can't help but know.
Yeah, and I don't
know, but you can't help but you can easily see marriages falling apart like that.
Right, and you can't. I don't think there's any blame placed anywhere. I know Noreen has remarried, so it's not. There was no animosity or ill will between the two. I think John just needed to move on and had accepted that that's what was going on. So, but that's a little sidebar there. Like I said, I don't have the date of the divorce, but as we go through this episode, though, they are still together in this time frame. So we're going to start off with the cast of characters in this episode, and we're going to start with one Sam Soda. Yes, that's his God-given name, Samuel Soda. Sam Soda, S-O-D-A.
Wow.
So Sam Soda was a private investigator, and he contacted Noreen. Now, Samuel Soda was born March 14th, 1942 to Joseph and Rosemary Soda in Des Moines, Iowa. Sam worked as a deputy for Polk County Sheriff's Office following his second tour of duty in Vietnam. He would work as a salesman and open his own auto parts store. But in 1980, he would start his own private investigation firm. According to Sam, the Gosches reached out to him for assistance in Johnny's disappearance. According to the Gosches, it's vice versa. Anyway, semantics. During his investigation into Johnny's disappearance, Sam exposed a man named Frank Sikora as a pedophile. Now, Frank was a reporter for the Des Moines Register. That is the same paper that Johnny was delivering for. Now, according to Noreen, she received a phone call from Sam introducing himself as a private investigator from Des Moines and that he had important information regarding Johnny's disappearance. She agrees to meet Sam at his office on June 13th, 1984, and Noreen brings a tape recorder with her. Sam agrees to be recorded, And so he then proceeds to tell her that during the second week of August of 1984, another paperboy would be kidnapped from Des Moines. Noreen asks him to take this information to the authorities, and Sam states that the police would not take a PI seriously. Noreen stated that she took the recording of the conversation to the police, and sure enough, just like with everything else that she brings to the police in Des Moines, they didn't want anything to do with it. She contacts 3 Des Moines television stations explaining what she had, and they also did not want to air it. So, fast forward 2 weeks, and on June 31st, 1984, a man named Paul Bishop, according to Noreen, from the CIA, contacts her and wanted to talk to her about Johnny's case. The way Noreen explains it is that she received a random phone call from a man named Paul, and he stated that he works with the CIA. He went on to tell her that Johnny had been sold into a pedophile ring. So Noreen and John Sr. set up a time for Paul to come to their home and discuss this further. During this meeting, Paul tells the Gosches that a man named Sam Soda was the person driving the Ford Fairmont the night Johnny disappeared. Noreen stated that Paul listened to her tape recording of Sam Soda and told her that he would keep investigating. Now, the recording of Sam speaking to Noreen has never been made public, but according to her, she still has it. According to law enforcement, she's never turned it over to them, but who could blame her with their track record? Now, again, Noreen, and this is her side of the story, states that Paul Bishop went to Sam Soda's office and the two men got into an argument. Sam pulls some strings and Paul has to testify before a federal grand jury about his whereabouts and what he was doing in Des Moines. Now, there is no backstory on what the grand jury was for or how Sam, quote, pulled strings. We have to take Noreen's word that this happened. Now, Paul Bishop took a taxi after the argument with Sam back to Noreen and John Sr.'s house. They were going to discuss the federal grand jury, but could not do so because Sam Soda kept calling, demanding to know where Paul Bishop was at. Paul spends the night at one of Noreen's friends' homes and then travels to Washington, D.C. under the alias Robert Levesque. While in D.C., Paul calls Noreen twice, and that, according to her, is the last time that she had ever heard from him. Now, while all of this BS is going on, Noreen receives a reward poster for Johnny in the mail, anonymously, no return address, nothing. Now, this is the same type of poster that the Gosches had been plastering all over the place and had put in front of all the cameras that would come to them asking for their story. On this missing poster is the composite sketch that they paid for, along with Johnny's description. So the composite sketch is, remember, based off the Paperboys, Mike Seskus, and the man, I cannot think of his name now, of course, but the 44-year-old man that was the lawyer. That's what those two got together, John Rossi, that's his name, and they came up with this composite. So you've got this reward poster. You've got someone has sent it to her. So on the one that she has, at the bottom of the poster, there's the picture in the lower left corner of the composite sketch. Right next to that is a picture of Sam Soda. The difference is someone, whoever mailed it, had taken Sam's eyeglasses and drew them on the composite sketch and removed the mustache. The resemblance is uncanny. And we will post this on our socials, and I mean, good Lord, if this ain't the same person.
Dude, that is uncanny. If that is an accurate sketch of the man that took Johnny Gosch, then damn.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy how close that is.
Yeah.
So
we need to post that on the socials when we post
we shall
the episode.
So the next person in the old lineup is Frank Sikora. Now, Frank was a 37-year-old paperboy in 1984. Yes, you heard me correctly, a 37-year-old paperboy for the Des Moines Register. Again,
you gotta pay your bills somehow, man.
I know. Again, well, you'll figure out why he's doing this in a second. That is the same paper that Johnny delivered. Now, one thing I wanted to say, and we'll get into this more in part 3 because we're going to kind of backtrack in part 3 and cover it more in depth. About 3 or 4 weeks after Sam says that there's going to be another paper boy that is abducted, you have basically that happen. On August the 12th, 1984, 13-year-old Eugene Martin left his home at 5 a.m. to deliver the Des Moines Register for his paper route. He was wearing blue jeans, a red shirt, and a gray pullover. Now, normally, Eugene would deliver the papers with his stepbrother, but on this day, he went by himself. Now, witnesses say that they saw Eugene folding his papers, talking to a clean-cut man in his 30s, sometime between 5 a.m. and 5:40 a.m. Around 6:10 or 6:15 a.m., Eugene's red bag is found outside of Des Moines on the ground with 10 folded newspapers inside.
Yeah.
Same MO, customers start calling the register complaining about not having their paper delivered. The manager heads off to see if he can find Eugene. He doesn't, but he locates the bag and delivers the remaining papers. At around 8:40 a.m., the search for Eugene began. Yes, that is the Cliff Notes, and I'm not sliding the Eugene Martin disappearance. Like I said, we're going to come back and discuss him a little bit more in depth, along with another young man that goes missing. But I wanted to go ahead and touch on that before we got some hate mail going, hey. So back to Frank Sikora. So,
okay.
So this is the same year, okay? You've got Sam, well, I'm sorry. Sam interviews Frank and as a private investigator. Now, the Daily Dispatch in Moline, I think that's how you say it, Illinois, reported Frank Sikora's arrest on Tuesday, October 16th, 1984. In the article, it states that Sam Soda is the spokesperson for the anti-child pornography group known as Stolen Children Are Reported Every Day. Yes, that spells out scared. The article says, quote, Iowa's largest newspaper today released the name of an employee who allegedly admitted taking advantage of 7 young paper boys, but authorities said they didn't think the man was involved in the disappearance of 2 youths. Private investigator Sam Soda told a news conference Monday.
The 2 Utes?
Utes. The 2 Utes.
I'm sorry, Judge. The 2 youths. What is a Ute? That's a great movie if you haven't seen it.
Oh, I loved it. I love it.
My Cousin Vinny.
So,
great movie.
You've got Sam holding a news conference, and he's stating that an employee of the Des Moines Register identified by the newspaper in that specific edition as Frank Sikora, 37, slept with as many as 7 young newspaper carriers and had sexual relations with at least one of the 7. Soda videotaped a 2-hour interview with Sikora Saturday night. Soda and 2 others searched Sikora's apartment and found numerous pornographic magazines and films, as well as pictures of the paper boys, which were turned over to investigators. Now, this is a man who is in a position where he knows all the routes and all the carriers, said Soda. If you read between the lines, you'll see that does say something. However, Polk County Assistant Attorney Ron Wheeler said Monday after reviewing the tape, quote, there was insufficient evidence to press any criminal charges, end quote. Acting on a tip from an informant, Soda said he investigated the Des Moines man and obtained a confession about sexual activities with the newspaper carriers. This man has admitted sleeping with young boys ages 9 to 14 years old for 7 years, Soda said. So that was the article in the Moline, Illinois newspaper. 2 days after this article, it is stated that Sikora pled innocent to 1 charge of third-degree sexual abuse and 1 count of lewd and lascivious acts with a child.
So basically, this guy's just a piece of shit.
Yeah. He's a diddler.
We don't like diddlers.
No, we do not like diddlers.
And you know what? The convicts don't like diddlers either.
They do not. That's one of the unspoken rules in prison. They keep them very separated.
I don't know. Jared from Subway got his ass whooped one time.
Yeah.
I know that.
He sure did.
And that was just probably the only time it was reported. It's probably happened more than a few.
I got a feeling anytime they can get to him, he probably gets his ass beat.
Well, the man was famous in a very weird way, but he was famous. He could have just made his Subway money
and shut
got
the
him
fuck
a
up.
girl,
Yeah.
But no, they got to diddle kids.
Had to be a diddler.
Golly, it's just crazy.
It is, man. So Polk County Associate District Judge Norman Elliott set bond for Sikora at $5,000 on each count, so that's a total of $10,000. In April of 1985, Sikora was sentenced to 15 years in prison for the two charges. I'm not sure if he served the entire time. I have a feeling he probably served about less than half of that. Now, the assistant attorney, Ron Wheeler, stated that Sikora had passed a polygraph pertaining to his involvement in the disappearance of Johnny Gosch and Eugene Martin. Now, Noreen would state that she was aware of Paul Bishop's real identity. Now, remember, Paul Bishop is the self-proclaimed CIA agent. But what was being reported was revenge for him telling her that Johnny was sold into a pedophile ring. Well, what are you talking about there, Noreen? Well, comes out in the papers and the press and the news media. He was not a CIA agent, but he was also a convicted child molester named George Paul Bishop. In 2005, he was found guilty of producing, distributing, and financing child pornography in Annandale, Virginia. He served 2 years and had to register as a sex offender. In March of 2016, he was on the Virginia State Register, but soon after that date, he stopped checking in and is now listed as wanted by the Virginia law enforcement. Some have theorized that Paul Bishop and Sam Soda conspired together to throw Noreen off the true path of finding Johnny. While it is plausible, and you have to let your mind go to a place that you normally don't talk about at parties. But if we are to believe that he was sold into a pedophile ring at that time, there's some very powerful players in said ring that we will discuss soon that are going to do a lot of things to make sure their names are kept out of the press. And so by sending two of their diddlers to throw Noreen is not that big of a stretch. So it's very plausible if we keep our mind open. Now, remember, Noreen had championed new laws and other legislation when it came to missing and exploited children by the time Sam and Paul had come into the picture. So there's not really any new leads in Johnny's disappearance until we get to the summer of 1985. That is when a dollar bill surfaces. In the Thursday, July 11th, 1985 edition of the Chicago Tribune, an article shows John Sr. and Noreen is holding a picture, a photocopy of a dollar bill they say was signed by their son Johnny. The article states, quote, "The dollar bill was given as change to a woman at a Sioux City, Iowa grocery store. A Treasury Department currency specialist said the bill had been in circulation since July 25th, 1974. At a press conference attended by Iowa Senators Charles Grassley and Thomas Harkin, the Gosches offered to trade $400,000 in reward money for the safe return of their son. Quote, "Please, we beg of you, contact us privately and allow us to have our son back," John Gosch Sr. said. "Our son has endured enough pain and suffering. Please return him to us alive and unharmed. If his life has been taken, we ask that we may have information so that we at least know what has happened to him," end quote.
I can't imagine.
I can't either, man.
Some of the things that people go through and survive.
And that's
you know
what
I mean?
that's,
like,
you know,
how do you pick yourself up off the ground?
I don't know how she got out of bed every morning, but she did. And that's why, like, say what you want to about that woman.
Like the smallest things that occur in my life can absolutely positively ruin my day. Just mundane, dumb shit. But your son gets kidnapped and somehow you're able to carry on. I just don't know if I'd be strong enough. I give this woman all the credit in the world for what she's done. I give credit to the husband, the father as well. I mean, we don't hear much about him because he left and she kind of But still, he has to get up every day.
Right. And he was
to go to work.
He was by her side until the mid to late 90s.
I mean, I don't know. Strong people.
Yes, very strong. And still strong. To this day, she is. On the dollar bill, to the side of George Washington, beneath the word United, was written, "I am alive, Johnny Gosch." 3 handwriting analysts have identified the signature as Johnny's. Now, in this article, it states that at the time, there had been 15 sightings of Johnny, mostly in the south and southwest of the United States. Furthermore, it goes on to say that in February of 1984, Noreen received 3 phone calls, each less than 40 seconds long and minutes apart, from Johnny pleading for help. The calls could not be traced. In March of 1984, after Johnny's picture was shown on network television, Noreen received a call from a man that stated, quote, "I have Johnny. He is alive. You can look for him all you want, but I'm never going to give him back," end quote. This call was also untraceable. So we get to 1988, and a letter arrives at the Gosch home. The letter read, quote, "I will never be permitted to return home. They have cut my hair. They have dyed my hair. I look different. Please don't ever forget me. Love, your son, Johnny Gosch."
Wow.
Now, both Noreen and John Sr. said that they knew for a fact, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this was Johnny who had written this letter, because their family always joked that Johnny didn't need to sign his notes with his first and last name and write "your son" before his signature, because he was leaving notes for family members and they all knew who he was.
Well, I mean, that's a good point.
I know. Now, the FBI examined the note and stated that they could not make a decision one way or the other as to whether it was written by Johnny, but they were keeping an open mind and an open investigation into his case. Now we get to probably the most famous of the people in this story that is not Johnny Gosch or Noreen Gosch or John Sr., and this is a man by the name of Paul Bonacci. And he comes forward 9 years after Johnny is abducted. When he comes forward, however, he is sitting in jail for child molestation charges. Actually, he's not sitting in jail. He's sitting in prison. And he had been convicted of child molestation charges on his own cousin. He was convicted of improperly touching said cousin when he was 17. So when he came forward, that's going to make him about 25 or 26. Now, Paul, depending on how this story is relayed, and there's a couple of different ways, and I kind of go back and forth on how to describe this. So if it sounds a little bit redundant, I'm trying to get the details of both stories into one coherent one, and sometimes that coherentness does not work a whole lot. But anyway, somehow Paul contacts his lawyer. He tells him about some odd things that occurred during his childhood. He states that he was involved in a kind of sex slave business. He recounts several stories about this child sex ring, and that he was at these parties where people would have sex with children, or children would do things with these adults, and some of these adults were and still are prominent people in the community. Some of them are people of power, such as politicians, judges, and police chiefs. And he names names, but we're not going to. Bonacci states that this is all taking place in Omaha, Nebraska. He goes on to tell his attorney that he was involved in the abduction of Johnny Gosch. Now, before we go any further, it is fact that Paul Bonacci suffers from a personality disorder and has multiple personalities. In one of the documentaries that I watched, and you can find on the YouTubes, that is centered around this child sex ring, you can see Paul kind of put his head down and kind of summon some of these other personalities. It's very odd. According to Paul, he says that he was used to kind of lure young children into reach of a man named Emilio, so that these children could be kidnapped or sold into said pedophile ring. Now, Emilio also would ask him to run/smuggle drugs on occasion too. So according to Paul, this is how this transpires. On September 4th, 1982, the day before Johnny Gosch goes missing, Emilio drives Paul from Omaha, Nebraska to a motel in Des Moines, Iowa. At said motel, he is introduced to two men, one named Sam and one named Tony. Sam was showing Emilio photographs of paperboys and telling him how much money he could make of kidnapping said paperboys. One photo, Paul said, was that of Johnny Gosch, and it had been separated from the other photos. Paul states that he was used to lure Johnny close enough to the car so that he could be kidnapped. So at the time this is going down, this would put Paul around the ages of 15 or 16, and that's just 2-3 years older than Johnny was. Now, by using Paul, it would have made it easier to get Johnny in the vehicle, or at the very least disarm him enough to get him close to the car where another man could grab him. At some point, Paul's job was to hold Johnny down in the back seat of the vehicle and chloroform him. Emilio, Paul, and now an unconscious Johnny meet up with a van driven by these two characters, Sam and Tony. Now, this story that he tells kind of goes along with some of the things that Noreen had told previously in the news, that she had heard of a car pulling up to a van and Johnny being transferred to that van. So if we're to believe Paul, from the time they take him to the van, they follow the van and they stop in Council Bluffs, Iowa to get some drinks. Then they took Johnny to a farmhouse near Sioux City, Iowa, owned by a man named Charlie, according to Paul. Now, Johnny at this point is scared and crying and asks Paul what was going to happen to him. Paul doesn't say a whole lot, just, well, actually he does. I'm just not going to say what he says. So, I mean, if you're wanting to know this, you're more than welcome to look.
Say it.
No, dude, I don't want to.
Say the weird thing.
I'm not saying it out loud.
Why not?
Because there's not a whole lot of corroborating evidence, and it kind of goes against what Paul later says, but you can use your imagination. Anyway.
I mean, do you think this guy's credible?
I think parts of his story is credible, and we'll get into that towards the end of this episode, but I think there's
not towards the end yet?
No. Well, kinda.
Well, good, brother, because this stuff's it's too much.
It's too heavy, man.
It's heavy, yeah. That's a good way to put it. It's just fucking heavy.
It's just, I hate researching this shit. I hate talking about it.
Whose idea was it?
I don't know. It's probably yours.
I think it was. Actually, I know it was. But we need to do like a lighthearted one next.
Yes, we do. We need to do like a ghost story. We need to find some kind of crazy cryptid we can make fun of, something we can yuck it up on. Because I'm just...
Yeah, I'm Googling it right now. What a funny mystery.
Okay, so back to it. Johnny was kept in a windowless locked room at said farmhouse of this man named Charlie for at least a week. Johnny was then sold to a man that Paul only knew as the Colonel. Paul said that the Colonel had a ranch in Colorado, and that is where Johnny was taken. The story seems plausible, but it also seems crazy as hell. Here's one thing that you have to ask yourself. What is Paul's motive for talking about this 9 years later? A lot of people say that Paul was trying to reduce his molestation charge, but he had already been convicted and was serving his sentence. Also, he is implementing himself in Johnny's abduction. That's not necessarily how you strike a deal. I can't come up with a motive for why he would come forward with this, because he does not get out of jail early at all. He serves the full sentence. Now we have to give you, and this could be a damn episode in itself, the Cliff Notes version of Lawrence King and the Franklin Credit Union scandal. So buckle up, Buttercup. If we had covered this entire thing, we would get lost in the weeds and really get away from Johnny's story. And I just do not want to go that far into it, but here's the short version of it.
You didn't let me talk, and I feel really bad about that because it sounds like I was just interrupting, but you just won't stop. I was going to say, if you get interested in what he's about to tell you, there is a full-fledged documentary available on YouTube about the Lincoln scandal, and it was pulled. It was supposed to air on the Discovery Channel or the History. It was going to be on television, and it was pulled.
In post-production. That's the oddest part of it. They had already financed everything, wrote the checks, paid for everybody to go here and there. And in post-production, they pulled the plug and was like, nope, it ain't happening, Captain.
Yeah. It's kind of like the documentary series that Dan Aykroyd was going to do.
Yeah.
And they had like 4 episodes in, and they just said people in suits walked in and said, this is over. It's not going to happen. Stop trying to make it happen.
Yeah, his Men in Black story's crazy.
Oh, man, if you haven't.
Just Google Dan Aykroyd Men in Black story.
That's my recommendation is Google Dan Aykroyd Men in Black. I mean, he's on the damn phone with Britney Spears.
Yeah, and looks away, looks back, and gone.
Yeah, look that up on YouTube. That's my recommendation for tonight because I didn't have one until just now.
All right, so here we go. The Franklin Credit Union was raided because information comes out that there's a lot of shady shit going on in said credit union, such as money laundering, embezzlement. There's missing funds, and an audit occurs. During said audit, they start finding all these odd discrepancies. All of this money is going to all these places, and the investigation is turned over to authorities. You have Lawrence King financing his own lifestyle and selling bonds at a crazy rate to keep this lifestyle up. One of the figures I saw was back then when this broke that he was paying something like $100,000 for landscaping at his house. But anyway, so that's what prompted the audit. During the investigation, there's a ton of things that come to light, and it's rumored that Lawrence King was funneling money to a lot of high-profile people to fund a demonic child sex ring. Yes, I said demonic. The claim is that the Franklin Credit Union and Lawrence King specifically are involved in using an organization known as Boys Town. Now, this is not the only organization they use, but this is the most prevalent one. Boys Town is still in operation and was founded by a Catholic monk for underprivileged boys who were basically homeless. The accusation is that Lawrence King and some of the people involved in his pedophile ring were using this as a way to supply boys to their nasty little parties. They're taking these boys and sometimes young girls, and they're doing some dark and twisted shit to them. For, quote, attending these parties, the boys and girls were given money. Paul Bonacci claims that he was involved in said sex ring and was given money, and that's how he was basically he was used up. He was no longer, I guess, welcome at said parties. He had gotten maybe too old. I don't know. But then he starts trying to find others, and that leads him into, if you believe him, kidnapping Johnny. Now, there were some things uncovered in the investigation that add some weight to Paul's claims. It is during his, quote, confession of the Franklin scandal that he states, I was involved in Johnny's abduction. Now, Paul says that the reason for the abduction of Johnny was that this pedophile ring liked to abduct, quote, clean kids. Now, you can use your intuition to know what that means. I'm not spelling it out for you. These, quote, clean kids were not associated with Boys Town or any other organization that they used to supply kids to parties. Paul goes on to say that on occasion, the powers that be auction these clean kids off to the pervert with the most money. Basically, what Paul is saying is that since he's been to these parties and since he's been taken advantage of before, that he's not worth much to these higher-ups. And said higher-ups of this ring had a lot of money and would offer $5,000 or $10,000 or whatever they would come up with for a, quote, clean kid. Paul also claims that he can prove that he was with Johnny Gosch. He says this because there are some identifiers on Johnny that he says he saw. One is a birthmark on Johnny's chest. Now, some of the interviews with Paul, it is stated that by knowing of Johnny's birthmark, this is proof positive that Paul knew Johnny Gosch and that his story is true. However, we need to point out that the birthmark was heavily publicized at Johnny's disappearance. It was something that everybody that knew anything about the case knew about. However, Paul also says that there was a scar on Johnny's tongue. Noreen confirms that Johnny did indeed have a scar on his tongue because he bit through it when he was younger. This tongue scar was never publicized. Paul goes on to state that Johnny also had a scar on his leg. Again, the scar on his leg was never publicized. Noreen confirms, yes, Johnny did have a scar. It was a burn scar on his leg. Now, the final thing that Paul says is that Johnny would stammer his speech when he got upset or scared. And he also describes the abductor, who he says went by Emilio. The stammering speech is also confirmed by Noreen. It is something that Johnny had worked real hard to get over, but when he became extremely upset, frustrated, or scared, it surfaced. So you got Paul batting like 4 out of 5 there. Yeah, he says the birthmark, but then he comes off with some things that were not publicized that Noreen's like, he's seen my kid. So there's some credibility in what Paul is claiming. You have the weird birthmark, and again, maybe he knew it from seeing the missing poster or seeing a news article, but you've also got the scar on his tongue. You got the burn mark on his leg. Noreen is starting to say, okay, well, there's some things that he should not know about. And according to Paul, Johnny was, quote, purchased by a guy that lived in Colorado named the Colonel. Now, in March of 1986, Emilio takes Paul to the Colonel's ranch in Colorado, and Johnny was still alive but being held captive. When Paul was arrested on the child molestation charges, the authorities confiscated these notebooks that Paul had with him. Paul refers to these notebooks as his diaries. In one of those notebooks, Paul recounts how in September of 1982, this man named Emilio took him to a farmhouse in Iowa where 2 boys were being held captive. The older of the 2 boys was named Johnny, who came from Des Moines, who was around 13 years of age. He also stated in his diary that the boy had brown hair, blue eyes, and wore a Kim's Academy shirt with black athletic pants. All things that Johnny had. So during this documentary, and I think it's also in another televised event, Paul is taken by producers out to Colorado, and they ask him to show them where this ranch is at. They never divulge the address, but I think Paul tells them, look, you got to look for an elephant-shaped rock. If it's got an elephant-shaped rock, that's the one. So they find said elephant-shaped rock. They find the ranch nearby. And when they pull up, the producers do their due diligence and find out that this ranch is owned by a prison guard or someone in the corrections business. But I don't think the guy's got a criminal record at all. Paul explains that behind the back of said ranch house, underneath a porch or a deck, there's an opening. And he said, quote, that's where we'd put the kids, end quote. Sure enough, when they go behind the house, there's a porch. Not only is there an opening, there's also this kind of secret doorway. And behind this door, there's these tunnels or foxholes that have been dug underneath the ranch. When they go into these tunnels and look up into the floorboards and the support beams, there are tons of names and initials carved into these beams. It has been theorized that if someone thought the authorities were coming, or if someone was coming to the ranch that didn't need to know about their sadistic little pedophile ring, they would take all the children and put them underneath in said tunnels. Now, in the summer of 1991, friends of the Gosches are on vacation in Colorado. They go to a Mexican restaurant. And somebody in this friend group goes to the bathroom. And in the bathroom, they just happen to look up, and written on the bathroom wall is, Johnny Gosch was here. So they bring this back, and I think John Sr. kind of run interference on this, and he hires a private investigator.
So there's graffiti on the bathroom wall. That's pretty much it.
Well, hold on. It gets better.
Okay, I'm just saying anybody could write that.
I know. So this private investigator that John Sr. hires, he's trying to vet Paul. He's trying to vet this story as well. So he's kind of keeping this from Noreen because she's still, working other angles. Anyway, private investigator drives out to Colorado to said Mexican restaurant, takes photos and pictures of the restaurant, the outside of the restaurant, the inside of the restaurant, bathroom, takes a picture of where it says Johnny was here. And then he takes these pictures and he goes to the prison where Paul is at, Bonacci. And according to the PI, he hands Paul the picture of just the outside of the Mexican restaurant, doesn't have the name of the restaurant, just the building, and asks him, do you recognize this? Not only does Paul state the name of the restaurant, he accurately describes the interior of the restaurant and stated that he, a boy named Johnny, and another boy were all painting their nails eating dinner one night when they all went to the bathroom and wrote on the wall using red nail polish. Both the private investigator...
Their nails?
Yes.
Okay.
Both the private investigator and the family friend stated that the sentence, Johnny Gosch was here, was written in red nail polish on the wall. Now, a lot of shade has been thrown to, well, how can they just pick the Mexican restaurant in Colorado that he just happened to be at? Look, people, I know this is hard for you to believe, but it's 1991. They were not as prevalent in America as they are now. So there may have only been one or two and maybe three at the most in this little Colorado town where they were vacationing. And maybe this one looked the best or had the best reviews, and that's why they were there. I don't think you can throw shade just because they went to a Mexican restaurant and by coincidence, Johnny had signed the bathroom wall. I think it was just that. I think it was just dumb luck. So in 1992 on America's Most Wanted, John Walsh features the Johnny Gosch case. The reason it was featured then was because it was the 10-year anniversary of Johnny's abduction. During the program, they present Paul Bonacci's story. During the same episode, Paul is talking about that not only are there kids that are in this sex slave pedophile ring, but some of them are branded. And there's a specific brand, and it looks like a symbol with an X and some sort of U or anchor type shape underneath the X. At the end of this episode of America's Most Wanted, they display a phone number stating that if you have any information, you can call this number and your name will be kept anonymous. Their hope is that someone's going to call with a tip about where Johnny's at. What ends up happening is they get phone calls from kids and young adults that are saying, hey, I was in that program. I was trapped. These people did unspeakable things to me, and I have this brand on my arm or I have this brand on my leg. So say what you will about Paul and his multiple personalities, but you have to wonder about his motive again. There's not much there in the form of motive for him to make this shit up. He's not getting much out of it by lying to authorities about some random kid in a different town that's gone missing.
That's an excellent point. I mean, he's not getting money from it, certainly. He's not benefiting from it at all, so...
Well, somebody brought up the point, I think on a Reddit thread, that, well, he won a civil suit against Lawrence King and the Franklin conspiracy thing. Well, yeah, the reason he won is because Lawrence King and anybody who associated with the Franklin credit union scandal didn't show up, so by default, he wins. He's never seen a dime of that. I don't know, man. I don't get it, man. But anyway, some have said that him coming forward was his atonement or his penance for being involved in helping kidnap some of these kids. But other than that, he doesn't have anything to gain. All right, so to recap, Paul has talked about the abduction. He's talked about these characteristics that Johnny had, and they all seem legit. Only one was publicized. He has talked about Lawrence King and the Franklin credit scandal. He's talked about the guy named Emilio, who he says is the one that drove the Ford Fairmont and was responsible in taking Johnny to Colorado. Paul is then taken to Colorado. He shows this ranch, tells them, if you go around back, there's this underground place where they kept the kids, and most of us signed the floorboards or the support beams. Sure enough, they go around there, and there it is. He then tells of how kids were branded, and after his story airs, you have former kids come forward saying, yeah, I was there. I got this brand. Do I believe everything he claims? No, because he kind of contradicts himself with something when Johnny's being kept at the farmhouse versus having to kidnap a clean kid. He kind of contradicts himself there. But there's a lot of stuff that he got right. There's a lot of proof that back up several of his claims. His claims about Johnny's abductions are where we just don't have any proof. Now, the authorities from Des Moines head to Omaha, Nebraska, and they interview Paul Bonacci's family, his siblings, and they ask them, where was he at the time Johnny disappeared? All of his family members, his siblings, they all say, oh, he was in Omaha. This is not like an ironclad gotcha moment that he's been making this shit up and he's lying. If you Google it, Omaha to Des Moines is only a 2-hour drive. So you could have been in Nebraska and Iowa on the same day. Sidebar, just like most things that the authorities in this case did, they waited 10 years to interview his family and never interviewed him.
Wow. Really?
Yes. And 10 years, ladies and gents, is a long time to remember where someone in your family was supposedly at.
Yeah, on just a random day.
Yeah. Hey, do you know where was old cousin Paul at on September 2nd, 1982? Shit, it's 1992. I don't know. I can't tell you what I ate yesterday for breakfast.
Yeah.
So the problem with Paul's Johnny Gosch story is there's nothing that leads anywhere to this Emilio person. There's nothing in his tale that leads to the Ford Fairmont. The only thing we have as far as Johnny's abduction is concerned is just Paul's word that he was in the back of the Ford and his job was to chloroform Johnny. Another problem with his story is that there are multiple reports that this Ford Fairmont was a 2-door car. While I know it's not impossible for someone to kidnap someone in a 2-door car, there's some obstacles with his story on how he subdued Johnny, threw him in the back seat, and chloroformed him. Also, the eyewitnesses, they state that they saw the man in the car and did not mention anyone else in the car. No mention of a passenger. Yes, granted, Paul could have been hiding in the rear floorboard. If we look at the Emilio angle, are we talking about Emilio as an alias? Because remember, there were reports that the driver could have been of Latin descent. Now, I'm going to talk myself out of what I'm about to tell you, but I needed to go ahead and put it out there. What if what people were relaying as slurred speech from the driver was an accent? And I talked myself out of this real quick because remember, John Rossi is a 44-year-old adult who's also a lawyer, and he would have known what a damn Latin accent is versus slurred speech. Playing devil's advocate on everything I just laid out is Paul would have been approximately 15 years old at the time of Johnny's abduction. I'm not taking away from the fact that Paul himself is a victim. He could have just gotten the name wrong when it comes to Emilio.
Yeah.
Now the man
that's definitely possible.
The man named Tony that Paul stated was with Sam at the motel would have been the tall man that walked out of the bushes, crossed the street, got behind Johnny as he's making his way presumably back home because he's scared. The private investigator that took the photos of the Mexican restaurant in Colorado also takes a bunch of pictures of random men that kind of look similar to the composite sketch of the driver of the Ford. inside this random stack of photos, he slips in a picture of Sam Soda in there. He takes this stack of photos to Paul in prison, asks him to look through the photos and let him know if he recognizes anyone in that stack. Paul pulls the picture of Sam Soda out and states, quote, "That's the guy that was showing Emilio the photos of the paper boys in the motel room that night," end quote. So not only do you have Sam Soda looking damn near identical to composite sketch with glasses on, you now have Paul picking his ass out of a kind of amateur lineup.
Dude, he certainly looks just like that, the drawing.
Yeah.
Dude, it's crazy.
Now, Paul's lawyer says that Paul is the one to contact him about all of this. Johnny, Lawrence King, and the Franklin credit scandal. He just dumps all of this on this lawyer. The lawyer states that he was actually leaving the prison after Paul has dropped all of this in his lap, and he's talking to the prison psychologist or psychiatrist, whichever it may have been. The lawyer asked the doctor, quote, "Is he telling you all these wild stories?" End quote. The doctor says, "Yeah. However, what you need to know is he's not lying. He's incapable of lying because he has multiple personality disorder. Rather than lie, he's going to switch to a personality that was there, that experienced the situation he's describing. He's going to tell you the story regardless of what you want to believe." One of the reasons for multiple personalities is to deal with some sort of horrible trauma. Paul switching into these multiple personalities is sort of a defense mechanism. Now, keep in mind, he mentions scars that were not publicized. Noreen actually went to the prison that Paul was being incarcerated at and spoke to him. She states that she believes him. And you have to give Paul some props because time and time again, his crazy stories get backed up by actual facts. Yeah, he's not batting 1,000, but like I said, the poor boy was molested from a young age, and then he's thrown into this offender offends kind of mentality. He's put in prison for diddling his cousin. Again, if you play devil's advocate, you would need to have been at the meeting when he tells his lawyer about the information as it pertains to Johnny. So basically, you would need to have been in the room when he first divulged the information about Johnny, him abducting or help abducting Johnny. Specifically when he discusses Johnny's scars. And the reason I bring this up is by being in that room when it's first discussed, then you would know if the lawyer led him. Was the discussion led in a way that he could pick up on, hey, I really need to say this, kind of a, quasi West Memphis 3. Oh, I said rope, you meant zip ties, that kind of thing. But according to everybody that was there, the lawyer, Paul, he freely just says, hey, come here, I need to tell you something, and just dumps this shit in his lap. Now, I'm not taking away that Paul's a victim. He suffered some nasty, awful things in his life, trauma that has led to the very least, PTSD, and at the most, a multiple personality disorder. The question that...
Well, I mean, definitely PTSD if what he's saying is true.
Yeah.
How could you not?
The question that has been asked is, was his motive for bringing Johnny Gosch into this based on the fact that no one was listening to him about Lawrence King and this pedophile ring? He was telling this fanciful tale at the time of how these powerful men are being supplied kids by other powerful men so that they can do these nasty, unspeakable things. By bringing up Johnny Gosch, everyone kind of took pause and listened to what he had to say. So that could be the motive. But again, I talked myself out of that because he gets 4 out of 5 things that were not publicized correct about Johnny. So at the very least, if he was not there and saw Johnny, he knows who did see Johnny. So I think if you want to know the truth, then you have to go to the source. The source in this case is Noreen. Could Paul have just gotten confused and actually abducted a different kid? Sure. Could Noreen be gullible, grief-stricken mother wanting to believe her son is still alive? Most definitely. But I go back to the scars time and time again that were not publicized. You're not just going to pull that out of your ass. So if you're interested in the Franklin cover-up, Lawrence King and all the strange stuff going on there, you can read the book, The Franklin Cover-Up, Child Abuse, Satanism, and Murder in Nebraska by John DeCamp. John DeCamp is the attorney that we spoke about that worked with Paul Bonacci. This book was a way to get Paul's story out to the masses. John DeCamp was also a Republican senator in the state of Nebraska from 1971 to 1987. Now, according to Noreen, in March of 1997, around 2:30 a.m., she is awakened by someone knocking on her front door. She goes and opens the door, and she immediately recognizes the person on the other side as her son, Johnny Gosch. And if you want to hear the rest of the story, you'll need to tune in next week for part 3.
Man, you've been waiting on that.
Sometimes I get it right. All right, so what was your recommendation? The documentary?
Just go on YouTube. No, not even documentary. Just go on YouTube and look up Dan Aykroyd, Men in Black. Crazy. Won't take long, about 2 minutes maybe. Crazy.
I'm going to recommend, since we have had a very, very, very heavy episode here, a TV show, and it is called Monarch, Legacy of Monsters on Apple TV.
That's the only streaming service I don't have.
And it has Kurt Russell and his son in it, and it is, I think, 10 episodes, and it deals with the Titans, Godzilla, King Kong, all that stuff. It's very good. Me and my wife, we binged it over a week, and it's really, really good, and they have upped it for a season 2.
Nice.
If you want to look into that Franklin cover-up, you can just Google it on YouTube. Google it or search.
I don't recommend it.
No, I don't either, because you'll want to like pour bleach in your eyes. But like I said, if you want to read about nasty shit about that, you can also read that book by John DeCamp. But I'm just, we had to get through that nasty stuff so that we can tell the rest of the story as it kind of ties up some of the things that's going to happen next week. But anyway, Coach, you got anything else you want to add? You want to put your 2 cents on it now? You want to wait till the end of part 3?
Well, I'm just going to wait.
Well, look at you. You got anything else to tell the ladies and gents out there in podcast land?
No, I don't.
Deuces.